BBC. Time now 7:38. When you're posting your latest selfie or maybe updating your status on social media, do you ever stop to think of how all of your personal information is held on those sites and how it might be used?
Social networking websites have been told by MPs to make it far clearer how they collect and use the data. A report by the Commons Science and Technology Committee says that terms and conditions for users are too complex and long.
Discussing this in just a moment. First, our technology correspondent Rory Jones has been looking into the report.
Every day last year, 400 million tweets were posted, 350 million photos were added to Facebook, and over 1 billion videos were uploaded to YouTube. But MPs say most users are unaware of what the social networks do with all that data. For instance, Facebook conducted an experiment where it manipulated the stories that appeared in users' news feeds to see how their emotional state was affected. That was allowed by the firm's terms and conditions. But today's report says most people probably click on these and forget them. Most people are probably unaware of what data social networks are collecting and how they use it. Twitter, for example, knows just how many apps you have on your smartphone and uses that information to target ads at you. That's something you can turn off in the settings. The report says terms and conditions are so long and complex that users are left in the dark.
I simply cannot say to a constituent of mine that I know with 100% certainty what they're doing with that data, because frankly I don't understand those legal terms and conditions.
The MPs say social media firms need to explain how they use data in clear, concise and simple terms, and they want the government to set some standards. Rory Jones, BBC News.
Well, let's talk about some of those issues now. In the studio with us, Dr. Kevin McNish, a consultant in applied ethics at the University of Leeds. Simon McDougall is a business advisor on privacy and data protection. I'm curious, if I can ask you first of all, gentlemen, because you're both experts in this field. Kevin, you first of all, what do you do about it in your ordinary life? I mean, because it's a very scary prospect, all we're talking about. Someone's watching you, looking at your data. I'm just curious about what you do about your own, how you lead your life.
I think I'm very careful with what I put online and where I put it. I use different services for different purposes. So, for instance, LinkedIn and Twitter I use very much for a sort of public-facing aspect, talking about my work.
But do you tick the terms and conditions on each of those sites? I don't know what you use.
Yes, I do tick the terms and conditions. Well, you have to in order to use them.
So you have no control?
Very little, absolutely.
And therein lies the problem, Simon. We can't use these services unless we tick yes to those terms and conditions, can we? What do? You tick yes all the time, or do you read it?
I tick yes, and I have a good idea as to how this data is being used.
Right.
But I don't read all the terms and conditions. There's some great research out there that suggests that if you read all of the terms and conditions that are in all of the websites and the social media that you use, you'd be using up weeks of your life every year just reading those terms and conditions.
So then we move on to the more interesting question then. So how is this data being used, and what is the future of this data? Because there's so much of it out there, isn't there?
There's a huge amount of data, so much more than there used to be. In terms of the social media firms, which is what the parliamentary paper was focusing on, they were focusing on the additional use of the information that we provide and others might provide about us, through tagging us on photos or through our phones noting our location, for other purposes, and in particular marketing. And that's the way these social media companies make their money. And we're using what we see as free services, but it's being funded by marketing.
Now that sounds relatively innocent. I mean, if all they're doing is sort of checking what you buy and then telling someone else, that doesn't sound too worrying, does it?
Well, I think there are two things to come out of that. Firstly, while yes, there is an element of marketing and understanding where people are coming from in order to target the marketing to them more accurately, there's an awful lot more information that's available about us on social media sites. So by taking this information out and collating it together, you can determine somebody's sexual orientation, you can determine their voting preferences, their religion, their ethnicity, even their medical history. So there's a lot of what we normally consider very personal, very private information that's on these websites. And that's true whether you actually confess to these things or not. They can be determined simply by your likes and other comments.
But just to be clear, that this is a process that is happening regardless. There's not someone somewhere looking at things. There's just a process. This is something that is happening automatically via the systems that are already in operation.
It's being developed, I think, as we speak. I think it's an evolutionary process. And so as time goes on, the systems become more and more complex and more capable.
And Simon, all of that, so what's happening is there's a picture being built up about each of us that can possibly in the future being mined, and that becomes valuable, doesn't it? So this data that we are giving up voluntarily becomes valuable to other companies, doesn't it?
It does. So if you look when Instagram was bought by Facebook, Instagram was a photo sharing site that in itself the technology wasn't too clever, but what Facebook were buying was all of the users, and if you break that down it worked out at about £18 per user. So what they were buying was the relationship with these people,